Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to thriller writer Steven Gore. His second Harlan Donnally novel is A Criminal Defense, and this is his third time as a guest on the show. Stick around. Any detective with daddy issues is bound to make for a good story. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview, brought to you by Amazon.com, Audible.com, and 1-800-DIAL-DJs. Please stop by the website, MrMedia.com, click on our advertisers, support the show. And remember, there's more than 1,000 interviews available at MrMedia.com. We've been doing this since February 2007. Hope you'll find something you like. And thanks for listening. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of San Francisco lowlifes who make Oakland seem like California's garden spot in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. When I just can't make sense of the world around me, I often turn to detective fiction for escape. The stories are complicated, the plot's intricate, the characters quirky, and often more than a little mean. But sometimes it's good just to be able to have a beginning, middle, and most importantly, an end to life's little mysteries. If only real life could wrap up its loose ends as logically as Harlan Donnally. Now, novelist Steven Gore has become a good friend of the show over the last couple years, even as his Gage and Harlan Donnally series have gained traction in the hearts and wallets of readers. Now, in addition to talking about his new book today, A Criminal Defense, I've also offered to read a passage from the book. Actually, I asked Steve to read a passage of the book, but he didn't want to do it. So I will read a passage from the book in a little bit, and he may hum during that. Steve Gore, welcome back to Mr. Media.
Thanks for having me, Bob. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to have you here. Always excited to hear that you've got a new one out. I've become a bit of a fan, I can admit. I'm kind of curious, before we talk about the book itself, I'm kind of curious how much more complicated your writing life is now that you've got two fictional worlds going on at one time instead of one. Is it a little weirder inside your head?
Actually, no. It's my life is simplified. When I was an investigator, I specialized in international financial cases, and there would be 3 or 4 of them going simultaneously, and each one had many more characters than I have in these books, and the plots were scattered all over the world. So actually, just dealing with a couple of people, couple of protagonists, and plots that I create rather than have to discover makes life simpler. I like this writing life. It's just, I mean, it's great.
But it's not, for example, I mean, you don't have Graham on one side and Harlan on the other side battling for, attention and who better plot, or this detail, that detail. We're gonna talk about this part of San Francisco here or that. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, there is there have been times when I've thought about. In fact, the reason I came up with the Harlan Donnally is because there were, sort of kinds of cases and kinds of experiences and a certain kind of reader experience I couldn't get out of Gage. Mm. They're really different characters, and so there's that old line, plot is character and action. Well, Donnelly's a different character. He has a sort of different view of the world. His background is different, so you get different stories. And so when I started getting ideas for stories that couldn't be Graham Gage, they had to be somebody else.
Mm.
And that's how I ended up with Donnelly.
Uh, would you ever bring a third character line of stories into this, or do you think two will keep you busy for a while?
I think two will keep me busy, though I am working on something new, a more literary novel that um, looks into sort of explores themes that don't that are sort of implicit in the thrillers, but can't be explored in the thriller context.
So, with everything you're already working on, you're still ambitious enough to want to go in a third direction. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's I have no clue how this happened. I was perfectly happy as a private investigator. I had decades in, and then on impulse, I started writing, and now I can't stop.
That's great. I think it's awesome. Now, I don't think I've ever asked you. I mean, when you were a kid, when you were in high school, for example, or college, I mean, did you like to write then? Was it painful then, or did you enjoy it? Or
I, geez, did I? No, not really. Yeah, never really. I liked, I was sort of politically active in those days and liked sort of that aspect of things, and sort of writing oriented toward that. But and yeah, and then years ago in the 70s, late 70s, I thought, well, maybe I'll sort of, I'd working in criminal justice. I thought I'd do some writing, and I started writing some things, and then I compared my writing with a friend of mine. He's an outdoor essayist, fishing writer. It's actually somebody that you might have a good time with, named Seth Norman, who's I compared what I was doing to what he was doing, and I just said I'm never going to be that good. So I'll just keep fishing. So um,
well, that's kind of what I was wondering. I wondered if there was a point in time since you started this career, rather, I don't want to say late in life, but later
it's
on
late.
in life. I
Yeah.
mean, I wondered if maybe there was a point in between where you almost went down this path before, and it sounds like that was you toyed with it briefly.
Well, I toyed with it then, late 70s, and then about 10 years ago or so, there was enough time had passed between from sort of street level cases. Everybody in this business starts out on the street,
Hmm.
with street crimes, homicides and drug trafficking and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I write some nonfiction, or not, sort of a series of interconnected stories to sort of show people what that world was like, particularly the early '80s, the crack years, and there was this sort of and so I actually wrote, I don't know, 60,000 words of a book, and the writing wasn't bad. What bothered me was that to get to the sort of the most tragic parts of these stories, which is the interesting stuff. It's the conflict, it's the ethical conflicts, it's the you know difficult situations people find themselves in. Um, were also the most confidential, and I didn't want to start exposing confidences. And also, I didn't want people to have to relive things that they've now, these many years later, has put behind them. And um, and then I started changing names and disguising places, and changing facts. And I was into fiction at that point.
Mm.
And and it sort of it kind of contradicted the theme of the book, because the theme of the book was that there's a certain way that this great drug war has been very corrupting. It's been corrupting to the criminal justice system. It's been destructive of people's lives, and I was particularly interested in sort of this sort of fragility of truth, factual truth, during the drug war. You've got informants that are setting up other people and lying about other people. You've got cops who are under pressure, body count pressure. They got to bring in people, and uh, the idea of writing fiction contradicted the theme of the point I was making.
Mm.
And then, 6 or so years later, I started. Um, I had the impulse to write. I just early one morning in the office had, for a conference call. Conference call is over. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I start thinking, well, let me see what this looks like. So I just draft out a couple of outlines, and one of them became the first book, Final Target, and one became the third Gage book. And then I realized that if I got the sort of the logic of the life right, and you've got sort of the moral landscape of how the world works right. That didn't make a difference whether I was writing fact or fiction. If I could find a way to get the reader the right experiences, sort of put the reader in that world and to understand the logic of it, how it works, then that's fine. And so that's how I ended up doing this. And that really shows up in this new book, the Criminal Defense, because I really want to get the meaning. How does a criminal defense lawyer become corrupt? What's the route? And how does it affect other people, and whatever. So, yeah. So this book is kind of an example of what I was aiming for.
Well, you definitely you definitely get a sense in this book that you've explored. At the center of this is this guy Hamlin, who's as dirty a lawyer as we can imagine in some ways. I'm sure there's dirtier. There's always somebody who's got to be dirtier and worse. And
Right.
and what's interesting is that instead of just focusing on, I guess we can say, I mean, the guy is murdered. That's how the book starts.
Right.
That's what propels the plot. But instead of just focusing the entire story on him and who killed him, we get a lot of backstory on how he became so dirty and so corrupt, and all the people he dragged along with him. I mean, and it's an interesting thing. And actually, now that I'm saying that, I think this is actually where I would like to jump in and read a passage from the book, because there's something that really struck me, and I marked this even before I asked you about reading a passage. This just really stood out to me. So, with your permission,
Okay.
all right. This is actually a little later in the book than maybe you would have chosen if you had done this, but this is from chapter 37. I'm just going to read a short bit of it, but I really like this, and I apologize if I do not do justice to your book. I'm sure the audiobook is much better, or would be much better than anything I have to offer, but here goes. Money. More and more, Donnally was convinced the route to whoever killed Mark Hamlin would follow a money trail. And he hated money trail cases. As a cop, he hadn't lied to himself. He knew he didn't have the talent. He didn't have the mind for it. He couldn't see patterns in numbers and abstract the character of human actions from deposits and withdrawals and balance sheets. He had a hard time just keeping track of the pluses and minuses of his cafe's money flow. And now he found himself sitting at Hamlin's conference table, surveying stacks of bank statements, 8 bank accounts, personal and business, all with connected ATM or credit cards. Donnally felt straitjacketed, paralyzed. Hamlin could have laundered money just by moving it among these accounts, and Donnally knew he wouldn't be able to figure it out. And I'm going to stop right there.
Uh-huh.
I just thought that was really cool because it deals with that aspect of, and as a reader, it's like I'm wondering, how are you going to explain money trail in this case? Because no matter what aspect you're dealing with, if you have to listen to an accountant, a forensic accountant, explain that stuff, it is deadly dull. If you're a journalist and you're reporting on something like this, it is deadly dull. And for you as a writer and as a former PI to explain and be honest about it, oh my God, I hate this stuff. I just thought it sang out to me. I love that one part of the book. So I loved a lot of the book, but I really liked that part.
Thanks. Well, in financial cases, what you do a lot of flow charting. that you really don't understand. Um, yeah, you can't see it in the numbers. You can't see it in the spreadsheets. I mean, to some extent, you can. If you're looking at a spreadsheet and you see money show up and then disappear, um, and the ways it kind of disappears. But you've got to do it visually. You've got a spreadsheet, and in working on those and financial cases, you've got, most of it was done on the computer, but eventually, sometimes you'll print out sort of a massive spreadsheet so you can see it and get the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing is trying to figure out sort of the character of the transaction by looking at how the money moves. Is it part of a fraud? Is it part of money laundering? It's, where's the money, where's the money going and for what purpose? What's the aim of moving it to some particular place? So, yeah, so there's a lot of that, and some people have the talent for it and some people don't. So I understand Donnelly's frustration because it's a little bit like reading tea leaves. He's not that kind of a guy.
Well, and we learned something about his character on that one page of narrative. We learn this is not going to be he's not going to solve the case based on that, and that's not going to be. Now, I didn't read. I'm 30 pages shy from the end, so that I do not give away the ending. I try very hard to do that. So maybe he winds up in the end. He does it that way. I don't know for sure, but it seems to us that you're basically telegraphing to us this is not the way Harlan Donnally is going to solve this case. It's not going to be through that. It doesn't seem like he's underestimating himself. He's just saying this is who I am and this is who I'm not.
Right.
So, I like that. Now, I was going to say earlier where I was heading was the connective tissue between Gage and Donnally is obviously you and also San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Right.
So I'm wondering about a couple things. One, have you gotten much pushback from the area about some of the portraits you've painted of San Francisco? I mean, in this book, I mean, once again, we're getting. That's why I mentioned in the introduction. These are not exactly the sparkling citizens of San Francisco who get highlighted in these books.
Right. There has been a little bit. It's complicated. Well, I'll mention one thing that there's only been one slash and burn review of the book, and it's just some guy that writes. The fellow spends a lot of time writing book reviews on Amazon. And which is great. I mean, I think it's great that people take the time to read the books and write these reviews. Always very interesting. This one struck me as so peculiar. The guy was taking it really personally, and it was like the book was a Rorschach test, and his review was the findings. It was the results. So and of course he had this little alias. So I spent decades as a private investigator. I know how to find out who people are. So I did, in about 30 seconds, I found out, what his real name was and did a Google search on his name. So the story is about this once prominent criminal defense lawyer who goes bad. Mm-hmm. Well, so what did I find when I...
No, don't tell me he was a criminal defense attorney who went bad. He was
a former prominent criminal defense lawyer who gets disbarred for 51 counts of misconduct relating to his clients.
Wow.
So I figured out, so that's interesting. So that's the only kind of pushback. I've had...
wow, that's a great story.
I mean, it's just bizarre. I mean, it's just... I feel sorry for this guy.
Sorry enough to make him a character in an upcoming book?
Well, no, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to be making any comparisons. I've got sort of expected responses from people in the criminal defense community. A lot of people know these kinds of stories. Mm-hmm. It isn't like I had to make that much up in terms of what the bad stuff this guy did. There are lawyers who are desperate to win trials, so they suborn perjury. they're desperate to get, attract clients, so they'll handle money for them in ways they shouldn't. There's all kinds of things that lawyers do, and kind of the higher up you go if you really want to go big time, it's hard to do it without becoming dirty. That's just the way it is. And certainly that's my observations after all these years. You don't see this kind of stuff, in public defenders' offices. You don't see this at sort of the court-appointed lawyer indigent defense level, generally. But it's people who want to go big time. And, not very many people are, brilliant trial lawyers that can persuade a jury with a closing argument. And almost everybody who goes to trial is guilty of some or all of what they're charged with. So there's pressure on people to cheat, and people cheat. So I've heard from a number of defense lawyers who say, "Yeah, we get it. That's the world." But they feel like they're getting beaten on too much. It's always the defense lawyers who are getting beaten on, right?
Some kind of complex at work there.
Right. So the third book that we're just editing now actually goes on the other side. It looks at a corrupt prosecution. So all of this stuff, it gets balanced out in the end.
That'd be the third Donnally book.
The third Donnally book. What the ultimate what bothers Donnally, and this certainly comes from me, I'll admit that, is that we have people, whether it's defense lawyers or prosecutors or police officers, judges, who willingly take on a role that's important in society, and then in various ways betray that role. And that's what bothers Donnally, because he's worked in law enforcement, so he's seen the corrupt side of that. In this book, he had a personal experience with this lawyer Hamlin of being attacked in trial unjustifiably. He's seen prosecutors who fudged the evidence to get a conviction or withheld exculpatory evidence in order to get a conviction. He sees judges that defer too much to prosecutors, that don't do what's right. They're afraid to. There's too much deference to prosecutions. There are too much participants in the war on drugs to be independent and keep their judicial role. And this comes out of his, Donnelly's own background and the way his father basically betrayed him and betrayed his older brother in a lie he told. So there's good reason for Donnally to worry about these things. And it's people who abuse positions or betray positions or whatever else. So that's his preoccupation, and it runs through all these books.
Would you describe yourself as cynical about the justice system and its work?
Cynical? No, I'm not cynical. I can certainly see we could do this a lot better. One advantage of working around the world is I've been in courts in Switzerland and Amsterdam and Taiwan and Thailand, all over the world. And there are some places where you see a certain kind of, I want to say wisdom in judges and other circumstances. And in Europe, they use these investigative judges that can sort of manage more of the case, and they tend to put up with less play acting, and even when you deal with in Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, I've dealt with sort of tribal elders. And people become tribal elders sort of not by vote, but by consensus. People don't impose themselves as tribal elders. I dealt with some people in Pakistan where one of the tribal elders was like 35 years old because he was viewed as having good judgment. I didn't think he had good judgment. but sort of they did.
Mm.
In dealing with courts in Europe, what I like about sort of the European, in the U.S. there's so much, the fact that people refer to American courts as a kind of theater really bothers me. Theater is something different. Um, Theater doesn't have to have any organic relation to fact. Well, justice has to depend on facts, what the facts are.
Hmm.
So there's certain ways in the European style and in the Netherlands and Switzerland, it's there's a whole lot less theater. The judges don't put up with it. If you've got a fact to present, you've got a legal argument to present, just say it. Don't act it out. On the other hand, I do like the fact that we have a check of a jury system, that we have citizens there that are kind of a check on, that you've got, 12 people exercising sort of a common judgment. And they almost always get it right.
Hmm.
Occasionally they get it way, way off. But that's life, and that's why we have appeals courts to try to fix it. So no, I don't get cynical. I've seen enough great stuff, both on defense side and the prosecution side.
Hmm. And I'm curious. So let me see. Correct me if I'm wrong. A criminal defense is book number 5.
It's number 5, right?
Right. And you've got 2 more in the pipeline right now.
Yeah, the contracts were for 7 altogether, and I've sent in the last 2, and we're editing the 6th.
Okay. So will 6 be a Gage or a Donnally?
We were going to do a Gage, and then I thought, well, let's do another Donnally. They're sort of connected to each other in a way, and at least as a trilogy, if they may go on, but I sort of wanted to keep the set closer together. So, and the editor was fine with it. Said,
Okay.
yeah, if you want to give that a shot, let's give it a shot.
And what is number 7? Is that the literary novel or is that something
No,
else?
number 7 is a Gage book.
Oh, so back to Gage.
Back to Gage.
Okay.
This one puts him in Asia again, uh, um, to a large extent, but gets him back. We learn more about Gage, how he became the guy he is,
Hmm.
and how he reacts when he's under more threat personally.
And has the writing of the books gotten any easier? Have you gotten any faster now that you're? I mean, you've essentially finished 7 books now. How has the process changed for you over the years?
Yes, it goes faster, and partly it's because, and I think yourself, that there is a number, whether it's 300,000 words or 500,000 words, that when you've done it, then you've learned to write.
Hmm.
I don't know if it works the same way in nonfiction, but it certainly does in fiction. I'm always amazed at people that have a great first novel that really is their first novel. It's just the first one they'd ever written.
Right.
That's astounding to me. Usually people have got some others in the drawer, the learning books. And so it does take a few 100,000 words. And once you reach that, it's more, I guess I want to say, it's like you learn to sound like yourself.
Your voice becomes consistent once you've done it.
It's become consistent. You're not trying so hard to, what do I want to say? It's not, the gimmicks are gone.
Hmm.
That you sort of get into at a certain point, you discover, and I think this is true across the board, that what you're aiming for is to give the readers a certain experience. And at a certain point, you stop thinking about the writing as much and how you sound to yourself, and think about how this is going to be, how the reader's going to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of get into the reader's world. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly, but
I think I know what you're after.
you stop fighting yourself. You've got a story to tell, you just tell it.
Mm-hmm.
and all the time thinking, what are you giving the reader in this sentence, in that mood? What's the emotion? What's the fact they're learning? And you learn also to the problem with being an investigator and writing sort of investigative stories. There's always a tendency, and you learned a lot over the years, and you want to tell the reader all the stuff you've learned. So then the reader, eventually you sort of give up on that and realize that you got to give that information to the reader the same way the investigator gets that information, in action, in emotional moments. And something happens and it just gets it gets easier. And I think it is. You stop fighting yourself. You're just writing, or just storytelling. I am working on a literary novel, and that's a little bit different. That's a little bit. It's a new style because it's less plot driven. It's even less character driven. It's more sort of philosophically driven, but that picks up themes in these other books. Picks up this Donnally theme about the people's roles and how they betray them or they fulfill them, or violate the duties that come with those roles. And so it's more focused on that in the non-crime way. So it's something new to learn.
When do you think that'll see the light of day?
I don't know. I'm 60,000 words into it. There's another 30 probably until I've got a draft. And so it could a year or two, a year to be done. I end up doing a lot of rewriting, and I think in terms of months, I probably spent more time. And I go back to it. I'll do a Read Writer book, let it sit for a month, then go back and do some more, let it sit, because I'm always working on other things, so there's no pressure to get. And for this contract, I kind of wrote ahead. I don't like writing under pressure, so I wrote ahead, and so that gives me a lot more time to go back over these things, and connect the books together to connect themes. Even as I was rewriting this one, I'd already finished the next Donnally book. So I was able to keep a certain kind of consistency that I wanted.
That's very cool. Well, I'll look forward to 6 and 7.
Good, thanks.
At least one more Harlan and one more Gage. That would be good. And folks, listen, you can find Criminal Defense, the new Harlan Donnally detective novel. Of course, he's sort of a detective. It's hard to say he's a detective. He was a detective. Now he's a cafe owner who moonlights, I guess we could say.
Well, he gets drawn into things.
Yeah, there. And who among us does not, right?
Who does not, right.
I get drawn into the drama of my daughter's everyday life, and I resist as much as Donnally does.
Wait
case.
A second, as the nearly full-time soccer coach, are you telling me that you're getting drawn in? You're a volunteer.
I get drawn. No, I get drawn into my teen daughter's teen drama all the time, and I
see.
I resist, but it just keeps sucking you back in. Well, folks, anyway, you can find the growing catalog of fiction by my guest, Steven Gore, in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order all of them right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. If you're watching the video, just below us here is a copy of A Criminal Defense. You can just click on it right now, have it delivered overnight if you need it, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, whatever you want to pay for. But you can order it right here. Steve, your website, Steven Gore, STEVENGORE.
.com.
Yes, .com. I was just thinking, did I spell Steven right? Yes, it's V.
Right.
People find you. Are you on Twitter or Facebook, any of that kind of stuff?
Don't tell my publicist. I do have a Facebook page. I just don't do much with it.
Okay.
I spent all my time writing, but once in a while I put something up.
All right, so people can look for that. Yeah. Steven Gore, always a pleasure. Welcome to the Three Timers Club, and thanks as always for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
You can see and hear almost 1,000 Mr. Media interviews by visiting our main site, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. or check out the more than 200 video interviews on the Mr. Media Radio site on YouTube. And I'd sure appreciate if you'd show some love for Mr. Media's advertisers, including Stitcher. Apple named Stitcher a top 5 news app of 2011. It's a free mobile app for your smartphone or tablet that lets you listen to your favorite shows and discover the best of news, entertainment, and sports on demand. You can listen whenever you want to more than 5,000 shows, get customized recommendations, and discover what your friends are listening to. My own list of Stitcher favorites is pretty eclectic. I start my day with an hour of MSNBC's Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. Then it's the latest 2-minute update from the Onion News Network. After that, I'll listen to WTF with Mark Maron, Here's the Thing with Alec Baldwin, HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and excerpts from E's Chelsea Lately and The Soup with Joel McHale. Also in regular rotation on my Stitcher playlist, the BS Report with ESPN's Bill Simmons, the TechCrunch headlines, and the Don Geronimo Show. The latest episodes of each show, whether originating from broadcasts, cable TV, radio syndication, or podcasts, are continuously updated. Stitcher is a free app for your iPhone, iPad, Kindle, Fire, BlackBerry, Droid, and more. And show your support of Mr. Media by getting, did I mention it's free? The app at Stitcher.com/Mr. Media. That's Stitcher.com/MR Media. Stitcher Smart Radio, the smarter way to listen to radio. We're also supported by Audible. Check out Audible's 30-day trial membership and download the audiobook version of the book everyone's been talking about, 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. Sign up for your free trial today at audible.com/radio. Again, audibletrial.com/radio. And finally, if you need a disc jockey for a wedding, bar mitzvah, corporate event, or just a big old party, please consider calling 1-800-DIAL-DJs, the party authority for all your party entertainment needs. You can call 1-800-DIAL-DJs or go to their website, 1-800-DIAL-DJs.com, and tell them Mr. Media sent you. And thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm William Kent Kruger, author of Ordinary Grace and the New York Times bestselling Cork O'Connor Mystery Series, and you are listening or watching the mendacious, is that really a word? Mr. Media.